Welcome back, everyone. In this video, I'd like to take a quick look at some of the things we'll be looking at in creating our texture libraries, why they're important, and at the end I want to take a look at one specifically and really go over how important it is to work with that particular aspect. Now, of course, this class is targeted at people who may not have done any kind of texture creation before. So we are going to start out pretty simple, and we are going to start out relying heavily on Photoshop's toolset to help us out. Now when I say Photoshop toolset, I mean things like filters, blend modes, and blend options, along with lots of other things, including masks and things like that. If you don't know what any of that is yet, don't worry about it, because we'll take it nice and easy, and you'll see it as we go, and all will be well. And those things are going to help us to create a lot of the texture information we want. Now, of course, obviously, one of the other things that we're going to use heavily is color. We're going to pick specific colors to get particular feelings with the textures that we're creating to sell the idea of what we're creating to our viewers' eyes. Now, we're also going to do lots of things to create other visual information or visual interest. And this is where we really start to get into things like how to create dirt, or grunge, or damage, or things like that that move beyond simple base colors. Again, in the end, we're not necessarily trying to create a photoreal texture. If we were, we could just go out and take a picture. But what we're trying to do is put an idea in the viewer's mind to say, this texture is this kind of material. Now, last but not least, one of the best ways that we're going to sell that to whoever's viewing our work is through the use of value. And value is the thing that I want to talk about in this video before we move on to actually creating some textures. Alright, so the rest of it we will cover as we go, but I did want to stop and just look at value for a second and give you guys an idea what I mean by that. Now, first and foremost, when I'm talking about value, I'm not talking about changing colors. So if we have the blue that I created for my background, and I open this up, I'm not talking about picking a different blue or picking a different color entirely. I'm talking about changing the light value of this particular color. Now in Photoshop, when we first bring this up, you can see we're set to this H, which stands for hue, or the actual color. We also have S and B. S stands for saturation, and if we switch over to this, we can see how saturated we are between very dark, or if I pull this down, it gets very gray. There's almost no color information. Instead, we have our dark blue. But that doesn't make our dark blue dark. What makes our dark blue dark is our brightness value, also known as just value. If we look at that, we can ignore this, and when we have our color selected, we can see we've got a very, very dark blue. We can make that even darker, or we can make it very light, and we can see the changes up here. We're not actually changing the color. We're just changing the light value of the color. This will become very important as we create different textures, and we'll have a look and see what I mean. Now, the whole point to having a texture library is to not have to do the same work over and over again. We start with base textures that we've created, and we keep those in our library, so when we want to create something new, we have things in our library that we can pull from. Here's an example. Now, this was created very quickly, and I would certainly put more work into it if I was going to actually keep it in my library. But we have what looks like a base kind of metal or concrete type texture. And I want to have something that kind of looks like a metal sign bolted to a wall. So I have this in my texture library, and perhaps I also have this in my texture library. And we can see, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of a ton of this. we can see that I started out with just this base gray color. I created a selection and gave it value, which made it pop off. But this, I mean, this can almost look like a planet out in some gray void, and I kind of wanted it to look like a bolt head. So I created some value behind it as well. And we still haven't completely sold this, but we're on our way. Then I gave it a little bit of texture besides value to sell that there's something there some more. Now to really make this look more like a screw instead of a planet, well, I made it look like a screw. And again, this was done entirely with value rather than changing any colors. Now I wanted it to look a little more metal, and often when we think of metal, we think of it as being kind of blue. So we added a little bit of blue hue to it. Again, now we've added some color information, but our values remain the same. And then last but not least, I wanted there to be some wear. So I created a little bit of rust. Now again, this is not one that I would use in a regular library. I would invest a little more time and work in it. But just for the sake of what we're doing, I threw this together quick so I could show you the importance of a texture library and value. Alright, so we've got our little chunk of metal that we want to be a sign, and we want to put some old screws on it. So it wasn't too hard just to get rid of our background here and just keep our screw, make a copy of that, and bring it over into here. And then all I had to do was make copies of the one I brought in, size them, and move them to put them on my texture. But that's still not quite very realistic because we have no shadow. We can see we've got light coming down here, but we should have some shadow over here then. So again, it was very easy to make some additional value changes and get a little bit of shadow going on around here, a little bit of ambient occlusion. But I also want some shadow coming from the light itself, not just from these being pressed in, so I made another one. And you can see very quickly how we were able to put together a new base texture for whatever project we might happen to be working on, and we did it using stuff we already had made from our library. Now, this doesn't mean that everything you make is going to end up looking exactly the same. The whole point of a texture library is to have simple base textures that we can adjust and play with and screw around with until we get what we want when we're creating something else. So we will take a look at how to make all sorts of different environmental materials that we're used to seeing in the world, and different ways to approach them to get different looks in some cases. And at the very end, we will do our little project and create a desktop background that's kind of neat and fun. And you'll get to see how we can bring all this stuff together. Alright, well that covers it for value and some of the other stuff. I think it's time we actually get in and start making some textures. So I'll see you in the next video.